Nerds, Big Tommy T here. I'm going to talk to you all about Bonfire, a really great game that's kind of hard to explain, but I'll do my best. So part of the difficulty in explaining how this game works is sort of the level of interconnectivity with all the actions. There may be some things that don't really make sense until you understand, the game as a whole, and then you'll see how everything flows together and how, well, if I want to do X, I need to do Y, and then do Z, and then do A, and then do B, and then I can do X, At its core, this is basically an action selection game. You're going to take an action on your turn by spending these little action tokens, these little cardboard squares, and the square that you can spend, that you have available to spend, is an action that you get to take. And one of the main actions, or really one of the main ways you're going to get points, is you're going to move your ship to these little islands on the board, and you're going to collect these discs. And these discs are tasks, and that's one of the main ways you get points. You'll get points by completing the task that is depicted on the disc. So I'm going to gain this, and whenever I do whatever the disc says, I'll flip it over, and I gain the points. Now, what those tasks are is normally just other stuff you do in the game. Like straight up, there can be a task that'll give you points for completing a different task, right? Like, hey, as long as you've completed a blue task, you'll get some points. Or if you have, 4 yellow tasks on your board, then you complete this task. It's that level of interconnectivity that's a little funky. Another action you can take is you can move your boat to other islands. Instead of picking up those little task discs, you can get these angel meeples. I think they're called something else, but we always just call them angels. And then you put your angels on your player board. You can also then get these sort of archway tiles that you put around the perimeter of your player board, right? I think 7 is the maximum you can take. They have colors on them and they have resources depicted on them. So you collect these arches and put them on your player board. And then you have these angels, which you've also placed on your player board. And then you can spend an action later to move those angels along the archways, in like a little path going around the semicircle on your player board. And whichever tile they land on, like each one can only be on one tile, that's where you will gain all of your resources. So like if I had 3 angels and the first one will move 3 spaces, the second one would move 2 spaces, and the last one will move 1 space because, they can't all occupy the same space, but they all fill up. So each angel is on their own individual little archway tile. So each angel will produce a resource that is printed on each archway tile, and that's the main way to get resources. So there's a lot of processes in this game, and there was a decent amount of clunk with some of them. Like that one is also kind of clunky, and that's also like the main way you get resources. I had a player like halfway through the game say, man, I'm really low on resources. How do I get resources? I'm like, well, you need to get arches, get angels, and then spend tokens to move the angels along the archways, and wherever they land, that's how you gain resources. He's like, man, that's going to take a while. I'm like, yeah, it kind of is. Everything in this game, I mean, you build up an engine eventually and it starts going faster, but things do take, again, it's a process. And of course, everything I just listed there could be on a task tile. It could, have to do with getting a certain type of arch, or how many angels you have, or what color of angel you have, and things like that. So again, you're starting, hopefully now you're starting to see the interconnectivity of getting these tasks and then completing them is weirdly integrated and part of the game. It's crazy. There's a couple other big things I want to mention. There are cards in the game, like special ability cards, and you can spend action tokens to gain those, and those are super strong because some of those abilities are really great. So if you get a good one early on and you really utilize it well, it's definitely something you want to invest in early on. There's also this big bonfire pointy thing in the center of the table where you rotate it and you point it at a little clump of 3 actions, let's say. It's normally going to be gain whatever resource is there, gain whatever action tile is there, or gain a portal. Now I'll explain what portals are in a second. The first person to take that action can actually spin that little pointy thing pointing at whichever clump they want, but then from there on out, every player needs to spend action tokens to rotate it clockwise, which is weirdly limiting. Like, I get the idea that being able to point it anywhere is pretty strong, but I wish you kind of could, like, if you have, because you can spend 1 action token to move it 1 space, 2 action tokens to move it 2 spaces, or 3 action tokens to move it 3 spaces clockwise. It would have been maybe nice if that 3 actions tokens you spend, or maybe you could spend 4 or something to point it to any space, because it's very possible that there are these portal tokens, which again, I'll explain what they are in a second, that are on all those little spaces, and you're usually going to go for a very specific one. They're randomized out there. You could be looking at it and be like, oh, I just need to spend one token to rotate it one space to get to that exact portal token I want. And then somebody comes and moves it two spaces, and you're like, great, now I have to rotate it like all the way around or something. I mean, it's somewhat a rarity, or like, maybe it's not even the portal token, it's the other stuff you're looking at. They're like, ooh, that's exactly my plan. And then somebody moves it one space. You're like, I would like to be able to overpay to still get the thing I want instead of it just being impossible now. It's way out of, it's nowhere near pointing at what I want. So I'm going to need to either change my plan or have other players move it around or whatever. That's one annoying aspect of the game. But what those portal tokens are these little tokens that go on your player board in between the giant middle part of your player board and those little archway tokens. Whenever you place an archway token, you're leaving a tiny little hole in like a funky shape, and that's where the portal tokens go. Now it is a little annoying that you place the arches going left to right on your board, and you'll place the portals going right to left on your board, so it'll take forever for them to line up for you to have an archway and a portal. And there's a clunky little thing is, if you have an archway and a portal and a completed task all like next to each other, then you can move an angel through that portal and you'll gain bonus points. And that is a clunky thing to explain when you're teaching the game for the first time, especially to someone for whom this is a heavier game than they're normally used to. That's almost something I'm like, look, there's a bonus point thing for having these angel pieces next to lit bonfires, which is what is called completed tasks. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Just know that arches go left to right, portals go right to left. It's going to take a while for them to meet, and when they do, I'll let you know some bonus stuff you can do. Because also, when you do that with your little angel piece, you're foregoing using that anymore for resources, so it's generally a late game thing. Now, one last thing I want to mention right before I get really deep into my thoughts on the game is that you have this player board where when you want to gain more action tokens, right? You have this big grid on your player board where you'll grab these rectangles that you have that each show 3 different action tokens on them, and you place them on your board. You already start with one on your board, and then you place another one on your board, sort of spreading out from the first one that you have, and you're trying to line up all these little pictures. So like whenever you place one of these rectangles on the board, you're gonna gain action tokens for each one that's showing on the rectangle you just put down. But if you can line up symbols, like if I could line up boat symbols, or line up red symbols, or line up green symbols, I will get extra action tokens for every symbol that matched. And also you can get wild tokens for things that you cover up. That is a really cool and really clever aspect to the game. That's one of my favorite parts about it. It's not only are you gaining more action tokens because that's what you need, that's just something you're going to have to do throughout the game, but it becomes a mini game in itself, very puzzly. You're trying to do it very strategically. You could say, well, I don't even know if I need 5 angel tokens, but heck, I can always spend 2 of any token as one of one I don't have, or same thing with resources. I can always spend 2 of any resource as one resource I don't have. It's a very Stefan Feld thing in the game, so it's very understandable that's in there. But it's just such a fun little mini game in there. And also, of course, how you place those tokens down there can be tasks that you have to complete. Pretty much everything I've said so far could be pertaining to tasks. How many portals you have, how many tasks you've completed, how many of those rectangles you put down on your board, how many cards you have, stuff like that. And overall, I think this game is phenomenal. Now, of course, there's some issues. Part of how difficult it is to explain it, it'll take even people who are relatively experienced gamers, it'll take a turn or two for it to really click on the strategy. And it does feel kind of tight in that way, right? You could be very limited in resources and in action tokens and realize you really can't do everything you want to do. Like the idea of completing, like there are these sort of common tasks in the middle of the board, right? That everybody could complete and they'll get bonus points for completing them. And that's like have your board completely full of task tiles, or completely full of those archway tiles, or completely full of those portal tiles, or completely full of cards at the bottom. And all of those are really hard to do. And that's something you kind of have to tell people. And I guess that is the biggest thing with this game, is when you're teaching it to new players, you kind of want to give minor strategy caveats, to make sure that they really understand that one of the main ways you're going to get resources is with those pathway tiles, or arch tiles, whatever they're called, and those angel pieces moving along. Boom. It takes a couple of steps and it's a bit of a process, but it's good to get that engine going early on, so you can make sure you're generating resources. Same thing with getting some really good cards. Same thing with that spinny, pointy thing in the middle, where it could just be, you got to look at those portals and say, well, hey, it's not going to point at the portal I want it to for a while, so maybe I'll forego doing that for a while. Or again, they should know that it's going to take a while for portals and arches to really meet. It's going to take a while, so the idea of pushing an angel through a portal so they can stand next to a lit bonfire and get those bonus points, that's a late game thing. A lot of teaching the game comes with caveats, but playing the game is so much fun. It really requires you to dig deep and think several turns ahead and plan really well and combo like crazy. If you can get 2 or 3 of those tasks that are similar enough that by completing one, you're kind of also almost fully completing another one, that's really strong. And generally, I don't even like Euro games when things feel too tight, when you're really starving for resources, or it feels slow or hard or difficult to get anything done. In here, you feel like you could get a decent amount done, and there's a decent amount of variability, but you do have to play your cards right. Again, like I said, there's a decent amount of wilds out there, and you can always spend 2 action tokens as one you don't have, or 2 resources as one you don't have. So there is enough variability where this is probably the tightest type of game I enjoy. If I in my experience of playing this game, if I had found myself more often being shy of resources or shy of action tokens and I accomplished less than I actually had in the game, then yeah, I would be, a bit more upset. But I feel like I accomplished just as much in this game as I would need to say, yes, it's a tight game, but I still thoroughly enjoy this game. This is at the bottom of the Tom tightness regimen. That's too much. So obviously this game gets a very high recommendation from me. I actually didn't play, it came out in 2020. I didn't play it until 2021. I'm certain that if I did play it in 2020, it would have been in my top 10 games of the year. But I mean, I'm certain that's true, right? And I'm certain there's tons of games that came out in 2021 that I haven't played, that I won't play for a year or two, and then I'll be looking back saying, I wish I played that. This is probably in my top 3 Stefan Feld games. I also I would equate it to complexity level of Forum Trojanum, which I think is one of his most underrated games. I liked that one an awful lot, and it seems like nobody's talking about it anymore, which is crazy to me. But anyways, I'm going to put a purchase link to Bonfire in the description box down below. Go ahead and get yourself a copy, and also while you're down there, there's going to be a link for Game Toppers. They're the sponsor for Neverboard Gaming. They're super awesome. And also down there's going to be a button that says subscribe. Well, hey, if you subscribe to our channel, you will never be bored.